Hi everyone, welcome to Plasma Call number 14. In this call, we're going to talk a lot of different constructions and ideas, like every call. And then, design considerations that can affect, a lot of the long-term engineering decisions. As usual, let's introduce and give updates. Anyone can chime in as usual. Okay, if no one is chiming in, I've been doing a little bit of research when it comes to design decisions when it comes to, because reducing plasma cache's data requirements by using committed collateralization is what I've been mainly researching, and we can talk about it a little bit later in this call.
You could do it now.
What?
We don't have Kelvin. Perhaps you could do a discussion with him on the checkpoint construction he had made, which I have also studied a bit, but perhaps you could start and we move from that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so what kind of checkpoint construction was he recently talking about? Because I missed the last call.
Right, so the construction involves that it's the Plasma XT, if you have heard of it. So instead of having to verify a coin from the history, from the start of its history, since it's deposit block, you effectively checkpoint it at some later block, and the extra protocol mechanism where you verify its history, you have to do it only up to the last checkpoint.
And and the presumption is that a certain number of bits are done in every block, and then it just cycles the entire
split it in zones. Yes.
So it cycles through the entire UTXO set. Okay, so I probably need to write about this because it's a little bit longer to explain.
Doesn't cycle through.
Huh?
That design actually doesn't cycle through the set, so that's an interesting difference.
Oh, okay. I think when we last talked about it,
Plasma XT splits it how it's designed right now. It splits everything. It splits and starts from the first 8,000 coins, then the next 8,000 coins, and so on and so on until it covers the whole coin space, let's say.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the same thing.
But it doesn't take. So if you have less than 8,000 coins, they fit in one zone. They don't like. Okay.
Okay. So a different construction that I think is possible is if you had a system, and this requires collateral by the chain operators. What you can
collateral as in liquidity
do is that collateral and I'll explain what I mean by that. Effectively, and it's not particularly trusted, is the presumption when it comes to this design, when it comes to trust in the operator. Against like that constructions given root train data availability. So what you can do, and to describe the problem, is effectively that in Plasma Cache, because you're pushing validation to the clients, and because it's doing, essentially clients are responsible for validating their history, especially when it comes to receiving coins, the data requirements may be a little bit large. What I think you can do, and I think I need feedback on this because I'm not sure if it works, is that effectively what you can do is, and effectively is that if you, do an update every block, then that becomes fairly large, right? Because you need to do this, the Merkle proof in every block. If you reduced it to, for example, once a month, then you have a trade-off of it being far too slow, and then you can only do one transfer per month or something, and you have to wait till that month completes. So that's the trade-off being made in terms of the timing constraints. think what you can do instead is, if you presume that the chain operator has collateral, has capital available, which is probably possible because, you know, the operator can probably charge for the, you know, time value or whatever it may be. What you might be able to do is that you basically set it up so that the operator has funds available, okay? And those funds available are quote unquote fast, in the sense that presume that there's a state commitment every block, right? And then effectively what you do is you have effectively much slower commitments for individuals TXOs. So that means that, you know, your state updates are once per week, let's say. And then what you can do from that is that you send the funds to the chain operator, and the chain operator actually sends the funds to where you want the funds sent. And then exit transactions, you set it up. And then what happens is you can do a revocation construction whereby after that week has elapsed, you basically unroll that, whereby your send actually go to the original recipient. And then that fast send gets undone. And then what happens is that that final state update gets made so that your TXOs get sent to the correct place. And then that fast send goes back to the chain operator, so that effectively there's no significant amount of load when it comes to, you know, state transitions. And then for the exit transaction, you basically make it so that if a revocation has been made, you know, there's a cycle there available. There's a time period there available for disputes. Is all you need there.
And so the idea here is that if the operator, because these commitments aren't being made to the main chain, the operator can double spend, but they have some collateral put up so that they will make anyone right if they double spend.
Yeah, that's the presumption.
Yeah. So I think so. I have a couple questions about sort of mechanics of it, but I think generally that kind of construction should work. But you have to have for it to be like actually perfectly safe, you want the operator to have sufficient, at least as much collateral as the total transaction volume between the safe commitments, right?
Yes. Effectively, this becomes whatever time period you have, the operator has to, basically the velocity of money. Velocity within 1 week, the operator has to have sufficient capital. So they're probably going to have to charge for that capital.
And you also then want the parties involved to be, like anyone who's on the network, to sort of be constantly gossiping these like block header commitments in order to, they have to immediately detect a double spend.
It does not need to immediately detect double spends, because effectively what happens is that when you produce a block, you have a commitment within the block for a specific allocation of the operator's capital to be allocated. And then in the effectively what happens is you split up the operator's TXOs.
Okay.
And then what happens is it is your responsibility as a client-side validation that you have to validate the entire recent history within the past week. And if you don't do that, what happens is that your capital may already be allocated, because in the withdrawal period, effectively what happens is when you reveal, you know, the splits effectively of that, someone may have an earlier split and that one gets replaced or something like that.
How exactly does this, so this is plasma cash talking about, right?
Yes, this is plasma cash.
Right. How exactly, so it is like the operator just has a lot of money in one particular slot?
Yeah, that they can split. That they can
and then you split that, and then, so okay, so what happens once it's all been split and it's gone to people? Like what sort of the...
How do you unroll it?
Yeah.
Effectively? So it requires liveness on the client if the client wants to use the original TXO. If they want to use the split, that the collateralized TXO, that's fine too. It's just effectively what happens is that if it gets revealed, if it ends up getting revealed, then maybe the delay period is a little bit longer and it's a little bit more expensive. But in normal operation, the client effectively, the user basically broadcast gives a transaction, gives a revocation to the operator.
Right.
So it does require the client to be online, at least once a month or something like that, which they should be anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think I'll still have some questions about the mechanics, but definitely would be interested in reading it. I think generally the idea of sort of collateralizing in order to prevent operator double spends in non-committed periods, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Have you looked at, because a lot of this sounds like it's got plasma debit like elements.
Yeah, I did take a look. Yeah.
So I wonder if you could sort of combine it with that, because
yeah. It could be more like generalized or something like that. Maybe we should like loop back on that. Maybe and then get ready for the next call or something like that. But I think the nice thing about it is that it resolves the problem of order of operations with time. I think it's a general construction that I've noticed that works is that if you have an ordering problem, you can generally pre-commit using capital by some party effectively.
As long as you're only capable of double spending. If you can triple spend, then you can over leverage your capital.
Yeah, so the main requirement is that, let's say the TXO A sends to B, right? And effectively, instead of A sending to B, it's A sending to the operator, and the operator sends to B. The problem is that, let's say B wants to send to C, the operator needs basically double the collateral, which is fine. It's a velocity question, right? It's like every time money gets spent, you need capital locked up.
Right, but what's keeping the operator from spending the same money 5, 6, 7, 8 times?
So the operator can spend the A send to operator transaction again, and that's fine, because what happens is the operator has, and let's say that's like let's say that's 0.1 ETH or something like that is being sent, right? In A sends to B, the operators, they instead send an A to the operator, and the operator sends 0.1 to B, and then let's say B sends to C. The operator locks up another amount of money from the operator to C.
Right, but how does C know that the operator hasn't already locked up that money to someone else?
Yeah. Right. So you need you basically need like that actually needs to be a TXO, which gets split.
But how can you tell that it hasn't been double spent? Is it committed?
Oh, because you need to do full validation for the past week.
For the past, okay, so those get committed to the main chain every block or whatever.
No. You do full validation of the plasma block.
Yeah, but how do you know that the plasma chain hasn't split?
Huh?
It's valid, but how do you know it hasn't been split?
Those TXOs.
Yeah, I don't know the chain. How do you know it hasn't split?
Oh yeah. You need to be observing like the Merkleized commitments to the main chain. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I thought so like at least some versions of sort of collateralized plasma chains avoid even the need to say, they just say for some period of time you don't even have to commit to the main chain.
I think you have to do that.
Well, so I think you might not have to, because if you're gossiping around, here's the block header, here's like the latest hash commitment, then you can tell as soon as then all the honest parties, let's assume within some period of time, all the honest parties will have seen the latest block header. So there's no way to triple spend money. You'll only be able to double spend money.
Oh.
So that's sort of how I think about solving that problem.
That's interesting. I mean, like, okay, I don't want to like delve into politics. I have a slight inclination against like the zero-conf constructions, but I think with sufficiently small values, I think that could probably
work. It's literally safe as long as you have a certain latency bound and a certain amount of collateral, and you need something like you're thinking about doing like Merkle sum trees in order to have to actually know the velocity, like know the total transaction volume on the chain.
Right.
Yeah, so if you have that, then like as long as people are gossiping stuff around, you will be able to detect at least you'll know what the honest chain is, and you'll be
right. And then it's this dynamic where if enough money is locked up by the operator, that, for example, here's the thing, you can't guarantee that the operator is not going to break even on this. Because let's say you even allow for on-chain proof of double spend to penalize the operator. The operator could make, let's say 25 different blocks or something like that.
But let's assume all the honest parties are able to see. So assume all the honest parties are gossiping the block headers. So that you are on a chain with the honest parties. Then they won't be able to cheat. They won't be able to triple spend a particular thing. They'll only be able to double spend it, once to an honest party and once to a dishonest party. But they won't be able to cheat two different honest parties thinking they've received the same thing.
Presuming that the honest parties can talk to each other.
Yes. I think so there's a very strong latency bound here. So that's the security bound that maybe it's unrealistic, but it is like it's additive security. It doesn't actually require. It just requires that you see any sort of double spend, any double spend within a certain.
Could we perhaps slow down and kind of reiterate on this construction, because the double triple spends, maybe we took it a bit too far. So
we sort of changed the topic. Dan, do you want to give overview of what?
So just to reiterate, if I understood this correctly, essentially you reduce massively the amount of blocks that need to be committed to the root chain without compromising any security. Is that like a one-liner to explain this?
What I was talking about or what Dan was talking about?
The whole construction that you described.
We're talking about different constructions.
That's basically a summary with the trade-off of with the requirement of explicitly having capital requirements for chain operators.
Right. So
okay. And could you perhaps do a more concrete or more compact explanation of the collateralized transfer of how A to operator and the operator to B, would that work, and why is that advantageous?
Okay.
I missed that, but it wasn't clear.
Okay, the advantage is that, so let's say, to reiterate, and this might be redundant for you, effectively, let's say, you were including your commitments in every block. Because you need to do client-side validation, you need that Merkle proof, and that can get fairly large. If you reduce it to one state update once a week, you're talking at that point.
It's okay at one per week. It is bound. It's like 320 kilobytes per block, bytes per block. It's okay.
320 bytes is or even if you had very large blocks, it's still okay.
It's less with some optimizations, but it's bound by that, let's say.
Okay, so what happens is, let's say you have the operator's outputs be once every block, okay, instead of once every week. Okay, so once every block. The client-side behavior is to basically, if the operator sends you funds, is your rule, because it updates every block. You download all of the TXOs that in the past, let's say week or 1 month or whatever it may be, that the operator gave you funds. So you just download all of the recent blocks. Okay. The behavior is that basically you do a pending send to the operator. Okay. Contingent on the operator sending B the funds. Okay. So let's say you wrap it into one atomic transaction, right? And it's signed so that it requires both. Okay. So the operator sends funds. So the operator is willing to receive it because the operator knows which outputs are good. And the operator knows that it will be able to broadcast your part. And let's say your part, not broadcast, let's say your part gets locked in, after a week or something like that, contingent on the operator locking it in, right? The operator broadcasts a transaction that says, okay, I want to redeem this signed commitment by A. So A gives the operator this transaction. The operator commits it into a block, into a plasma block. And then what happens is effectively A no longer has access to that TXO, right? And then B also knows that they're receiving the funds effectively now, right? And then what happens is the operator will be able to receive the funds in 1 week, right? That's the presumption. So there's that time delay whereby B effectively not really gets the money now because it can be sort of like rolled back in a certain way, but let's say B can send it to someone else, you know? So then what happens is that after 1 week has elapsed, or whatever the time period, let's say it's 1 week, it could be 1 month, whatever it may be, for that time period, for time period between state updates for that TXO, we define it as 1 week. A can then either redeem that output after 1 week, or here's the thing is, I don't even know if you need to write this in the code. This part is actually might end up being optional, but what you can do, I mean, maybe first iterations, you don't include this because it's additional code, is that A can basically give the operator a revocation, whereby A is basically saying, actually, before, why don't you, and this could actually be another transaction rolling. No, never mind. Sorry, I don't mean to confuse you. Anyway, you could do a construction whereby actually now it's A sends to B, and then the A sends to operator gets undone as just the, I mean, operator sends to B is just the operator's coins now, so that the original TXO is A sends to B, and then the operator keeps the coins. I did the last part, not a good explanation.
So effectively, the operator has to have funds available
Yes.
for, let's say, 1 week amount of transactions.
Of velocity, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you could set that number to 1 day. You could set that number to, you know, whatever you want. Effectively,
whereby velocity is defined.
Huh?
Whereby velocity is defined as the total amount of whatever currency gets transacted in that week. Volume.
Yeah.
Volume rather than velocity. Okay.
Yeah, volume.
Okay, yeah. So the collateral has to be at least equal to the volume.
Yeah, and at that point, you probably have to charge for the funds. If you have you could also have other people providing collateral, but those other people have to be live to be committing these changes.
Right. I think with this that you said, the other people providing collateral slightly relates to the construction inside Plasma Debit, where we could have users providing the collateral, and we could manage this as a DAO. I briefly wrote this in the HackMD. So, for example, you could have it like all the users like make a deposit to provide liquidity or collateral or whatever. And a smart contract will govern all that liquidity. And essentially, it becomes the same as having one entity controlling all the liquidity, but at the end of every whatever time period, you could have some dividends being paid out or whatever from any fees or subscription model that the chain wants to employ.
Right.
In order to allow a chain that has multiple validators, perhaps, other than one plasma operator, which is what I want to do.
Yeah. So if you have a lot of operators, then it becomes much simpler. So let's say it's, you know, if you have 100 operators, they each provide their own collateral, then when you create a block, you can do these types of transactions, but it requires collateral on your end. So, you know, then you can effectively, you know, split it up if, you know, okay, let's say, you know, operator 1 is producing a block now, and then operator 2 produces a block to the next block. Operator 2 only needs sufficient collateral within their own blocks for those state transitions. That might make it much more clean in that way, in terms of, you know, fund requirements.
I mean, the required collateral per operator, per validator, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It would be the volume divided by the number of. Or actually, no, we cannot presume. Actually, it would be the volume that happens in that validator's slot, where in that validator's block. So we cannot really make any assumptions like split it equally or whatever.
Yeah. But the validator can prefer transactions of a certain size as well. You know, is the presumption.
Okay.
Selection.
Okay.
So on average, let's say it's proportional or something. But it could be, the variance on that could be fairly large. You're right, George. Yeah. So yeah. That's totally, that's a good idea, Georgios, is that, with validator constructions, that does help a lot. I think that's a reasonable requirement. I think when it comes to doing a DAO-like construction, the complexity is it does require effectively, if you don't have SNARK, you may be trusting the validator to not double spend.
Yeah, I think you need consensus, and like you can 51% attack and wreck people's funds, maybe.
Yeah, if you did a DAO construction, then that does have that risk. If you had ZK Starks or something like that, you may be able to get around that. But it's kind of, I don't know.
We need.
I'm thinking something closer in a timeline, so I'd rather not get snark discussion.
Yeah, I think per validator collateral.
Yeah. So per validated collateral is very doable. Or if you want, effectively you could have, if let's say your validator was insufficiently capitalized, maybe you can have effectively, whoever's collateral you're putting up, let's say it's just one person's, that person needs to sign off on your blocks as well or something like that. Then it's clean.
Okay, that is, I think, the least of our concerns in this construction, like governing how the collateral will be split up.
Yeah. Especially if, you're charging, 0.1% or, something very, very small. If it's 1 week of time value, it should be something like, below 0.1% or something like that, probably, I guess. 0.1%.
Zwanzi, I see that you've been taking a lot of notes. Would you perhaps have some input on Joseph's construction?
I was thinking that this thing works by committing to a velocity over a certain period of time.
Yeah.
That's how you do that trade-off. And I think you can compose this at a smaller level to get rid of the need to validate 1 week's key worth of history. For example, by within the small blocks, the operator also commits to what part of C have I spent. Like I've spent C over 3 in this block, 0.5 in this block.
Wait, how much money each block is transacting? Is that what they're committing to? And that helps because
much less data. It's a really interesting idea. I need to think about it more because it's fairly compelling. Effectively, instead of you do a Merkle sum tree of all of the funds being transferred, and then you just say, okay, this is the amount of data, the amount of things we're committing to, so that in the event of a dispute or a double spend or something, then you lazily produce the proof later. But effectively, the client-side validation drops dramatically as a result, probably, would be my guess, right? Is that a good summary?
I think you should ideally want it. I think you can prove kind of a lower bound of how much you need to force people to validate. It should be, you need to validate like 1 Merkle proof every week. And then, so in your current thing, within the week, you have to validate the entire thing. But what I think is should be possible is to do it so that instead of validating everything in that week, you validate everything in a day, and also verify a few small things for 3 days.
To make sure that the totals.
Isn't that as probabilistic?
Yeah, one way would be to for you to just add up the totals.
Yeah, it's not probabilistic. What he means is effectively because you basically include the Merkle sum tree of the amount of basically the velocity within that block, the amount of total value of transactions, so that you only need to validate the block in which your transaction went in, and then for subsequent blocks you validate the amount of funds being transferred. Is that the summary?
Yeah.
Even thinking of MST, but I think that's a better way to do it.
That is clear. That's clear.
Exceeds what it says, it was the velocity. If the velocity in a block exceeds what the operator said, then all the transactions in there are invalid. But I think that's a better way.
Oh, this is always one of those funny things where it's like, oh, misunderstanding. But I think you had the key insight there when it comes to data reduction and how to do that. I think that's a really, really good idea.
Joseph, in this case, maybe you can do some other thing. For example, let's say an operator has a coin. And what he can do in terms of normal plasma cache, he can split it and make a very large tree of allocations, one per block, and have the next part available for next allocations in the next blocks. And then once per week, an operator does the final allocation. So effectively, he takes his coins and he already pre-allocated and gives this to users. So this is almost exactly the same. So you can even just extend the plasma cache construction, like make the 0 coin the operator's coin, and only an operator does all this over a week. He actually splits his coin all the way down to the smallest amount, and you can always see how he splits it. So there is no possible double spend in this case.
That's basically that's basically what we're describing, whereby the operator's funds are basically being the ones spent, and then the other people are giving the funds to the operator.
I think the other part is more technical.
Huh?
We can make the technical constructions.
Right now it's very vague. But I think giving more detail. Like you're interested.
Could you perhaps be able to provide a written?
Sorry. I think writing it up in a couple of days should be a good idea.
It would clear things up a lot.
But I think it's this does work, and it can probably make the plasma cache basically feasible for very, very light clients like phones and stuff like that, I think.
And for longer chains, because if the chain is not big enough, the data is not a problem.
But
the problem
especially
after operation or something.
Even once a week, I think should be sufficient for chains and TXOs to last many years, probably.
Actually,
like we're talking about at most megabytes per TXO, when it comes multi-megabyte per TXO, and that's probably should be fine at that point when it comes to validation. And then that way you can get the data fed directly from the chain operators or the validators or the P2P network or something pretty easily.
So
can you turn up your volume a little bit, Shwani?
I understood something slightly differently from what Alex seems to understood. I thought your thing works for a scheme where you don't have any coin splitting. So the transaction incurred by, the velocity incurred by like a transaction that sends 10 and gets 5 and change is 15.
I haven't thought about this yet. You can have, at the minimum you can have coin splitting, but the total value before the split is the value that probably needs to be locked up, would be my guess. So the idea is that you think or something a split.
Wouldn't this depend on the on how this actually gets implemented? So the whole, if I want to send you 5 Ether and I have a 10 one, and it goes like I send you 10 and I get back 5, wouldn't really depend on the initial implementation on how it is, because perhaps it could be implemented in a way that I can just send you directly 5 without having to go back and forth.
Oh, yeah. And that way it's more capital efficient. It probably requires larger transaction
I
sizes.
think.
Yeah.
I think. But I don't think that our previous discussions on splitting or whatever previous discussion on splitting, did any of them end up in a feasible design other than the one Dan has proposed?
Mhm.
I mean, I remember the one with the bit field that between sibling coins, but I'm not aware of any other scheme that would work for non-adjacent coins.
Yeah, I mean, I've even soured on the idea of splitting and merging non-sibling coins. I've started to think that that's basically impossible to do without sort of like really changing the assumptions. So I think and I think mostly splitting with splitting with coins actually works for stuff. So I think it works for this largely, but
Yeah. I think it should be fine, and that's fine. You just have siblings, and that should be okay. I feel like you could tack on another scheme if you want to do merging by asking everyone to basically, transition the entire TXO set or something.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like this is a construction that basically could be helpful for people thinking in general about cryptoeconomics, where the problem when reasoning about this, the problem is primarily around the philosophy of the arrow of time. You can't go backwards in time, right? And you are always, due to the arrow of time, you're always going to be able to prove things in the past, right? So you can prove that in the past, when you do effectively your client side validation, you can prove that there hasn't been double spends in the past, and you can prove that like you haven't there haven't been any malfeasance in the past by doing validation on your computer. You can't really prove in the future in a vacuum that someone isn't going to double spend. Effectively, what you may need is capital commitments by people to make proofs when it comes to not proofs, but commitments in the future. So if you make capital, anytime you have a problem with behavior in the future, potentially, and that includes double spends, one avenue can be, committing to locking up capital is one strategy.
Perhaps Carl can include this tactic in his course.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, this is one of Vitalik's like more esoteric beliefs, is like that blockchains, all they prove is they prove non-existence at a particular time. And you could talk to him about but it kind of makes sense, right? This really did not happen in this block because I can see the block and I can check. And once we know that there wasn't a double spend, we can act accordingly and spend money.
Yeah. I think it's fairly interesting because it's sort of like when it comes to these design constraints, you presume that, here's the thought pattern when it comes to, why certain things are a problem, right? Is that let's say you try to do this without capital requirements, where you broadcast a block where it's, A sends to B, right? And then what happens is that in a later block, the operator can basically, in that block, which includes A to B, the operator can withhold the data, right? And then in a later block goes, A to C, and then they can start double spending certain activities due to data withholding attacks. So it's the problem of, these capital constraints are actually fundamentally to get around data withholding attacks, which I think is fairly, I don't know. I find it kind of interesting that like you can use capital requirements to get around like data withholding attacks.
Yeah, super interesting.
So I think that could be fun. I think that can make, a lot of the work that we've been, again, it's very experimental and should be written up and will be written up. But I think it makes a lot of the PlasmaCast research that we've been doing in the past couple months, I think, much, much more like, oh, yeah, okay, the light clients can totally do this. And I think could be really fun and like, basically, I think resolves a lot of, the complexities around that and can make it so that, a lot of the research that we've been all doing on this, like, perhaps usable and releasable, much sooner, perhaps. Who knows?
Plasma cash is plasma.
I don't know.
This is very well established so far.
Yeah,
So
but I think the work that people have been doing on MVP have been very effective in terms of like getting where we are now, and is usable for like like testing, at least testing the constructions and experimenting, and it's a much smaller coach change as a consequence.
Yeah. And speaking of MVP, just as a quick little update, I mean, I actually am curious if David Knott has a real update, but I know that the main thing that I was doing was just chatting with Kelvin about mass exit mitigation, combining exit. But David, has there been any kind of like updates in that regard?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk essentially about messing with aggregated signatures. So like probably something along the lines of BLS to essentially allow everyone participating in a mass withdrawal to sign off on a hash of it. Essentially there's a lot of conversation about that. We have also talked a lot this week about essentially doing fast withdrawals in the case that the child chain operator is malicious, because previously if the Plasma MVP-esque chain operator essentially invalidates the chain, then everyone actually either can mass exit or do a normal exit, but they still have to wait a fairly long period of time before they get their funds. And kind of the way to do that is actually also with like, yeah. What were you saying?
I read about that. I read about that construction, and I do not believe that the protocol overhead is worth it, considering it's worth the benefits it gives. Given that it's an interesting construction, of course, but like I do not think that adding this kind of overhead in the protocol is perhaps worth the cases where we want a fast withdrawal from a non-functioning plasma chain, I believe, because if I'm not mistaken, it requires a new piece of challenge, and generally, I don't know, I believe it makes it more inefficient.
It's definitely more inefficient and requires more overhead, but it works when the operator is malicious, essentially. So
it's a UX upgrade.
To me, it would be more of a to me it'd be more of a modular add. Okay, I wouldn't say like it's purely a UX upgrade, given that if people have value, if people have value or state on a plasma chain, and like a business is relying on it, the difference between having your stuff locked for a week or having it available quickly, in some cases I think it will make a difference. I guess I see it not as like instead of the like simple fast withdrawal mechanism, but as kind of like a potential modular addition.
Right. Regarding mass exits, as far as I know, BLS signatures, they only do aggregation. So can you verify if somebody signed on a faulty exit? So can you do fault attribution on BLS signatures? Say we do 5 signatures on the same. Yeah, you can do. So you can know who faulty sign.
Yes, you're able to have a testability.
And also you mentioned that N parties, basically the N parties of the mass exit, they sign on a hash, which is the hash of the mass exit, I guess, or some identifier that identifies the action that is happening. As far as I know, again, the BLS signatures, they're used for N signatures by N parties on N different messages. So isn't it maybe an overkill, if you will, to use that? And perhaps there is another scheme that can be used to do multiple signatures because we're using the same message.
I don't think there's that much overhead. I think At least my understanding is that that is the way BLS work, but the new BLS signature is more efficient.
Okay.
Than that, I believe. I can.
Do you have any paper to refer to?
I'm looking up the paper now, and I'll post it in chat when I find it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I think Dan had a question for those.
Yeah. So, do you actually sign on some Merkleized summary of all exiting UTXOs for a mass exit?
You just lagged out. Can you repeat that?
So in terms of BLS, this mass exit construction, people use aggregated BLS to sign on a Merkle root hash of some summary of all their exits, right? And so if someone, if they give their signatures voluntarily, they will not most likely sign on invalid exits. Or what do you perceive?
How so?
Well, let's say we exit something like 10 UTXOs simultaneously, and so we make a Merkle tree and let these 10 owners of this 10 UTXOs sign on it. In principle, other signers maybe should check that these exits are valid, so they will not sign on invalid agreement.
Yeah, they should all be they should be checking this off chain. They shouldn't sign anything where they aren't able to see all the information.
What's the advantage you get over a cryptoeconomic aggregate signature, given that you need like a challenge period anyway?
The primary advantage over a cryptoeconomic aggregated signature, I believe, is that this could potentially be, I believe it's smaller, essentially.
But you still need the bitmap, and you still, I mean, isn't it? Cryptoeconomic aggregate signature is literally just 1 bit per output, right? And then BLS signature is going to be that plus also, a short signature, But
this way, you basically have all the signatures already on chain instead of having everyone having to challenge that bitmap.
Right. You don't
right. You still, so it shortens that interactive game. Essentially, because all the signatures anyone can check. They're all available.
You don't have this problem.
So that's the advantage.
Challenge the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Very cool.
Okay.
And then, the last thing that's, I think it's 2 pairing. But I will,
I know the paper you're talking about. Yeah. The one which does a BLS signature with 2 pairings instead of n pairings. That's that one.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking about, exactly. And then another thing we've been talking about this week, which is kind of probably less important pragmatically, but still interesting, is just when challenges are made, we should expect front running to occur. But it's also in block proposers' best interest to essentially include T-exit transactions that will fail, essentially just to get the gas. And so it would be interesting if we could essentially economically disincentivize them doing that. But at least
can you verify that in the chat? Can you verify that that's the paper?
That might have it. I think that's it. Yes.
Cool.
I'm more familiar with the full version that links to, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay.
That's it.
It's not a light read, for sure.
Yeah, that's the update for this week.
All right. Do you have anything further you want to discuss? Because I have some discussions I have around plasma debit if we have some time.
Go for it.
Okay. Anybody else perhaps that wants to say anything?
No, let's just go for it. Yeah.
All you.
All right. So Plasma debit TLDR, we do state channel, we do a payment channel between each coin and the operator, and in order to do arbitrary denomination payments, we require atomic increase and decrease of 2 coins or n coins between 2 users with the operator. So firstly, I want to discuss what kind of transaction format we would require to make this happen. So firstly, I imagine that we have 2 scenarios or maybe 3 scenarios. Firstly, the one scenario is where I as a user hold my coin and I just alter its value. And essentially this acts like a channel with the operator. And my guess would be that I have to add a nonce field in the transaction formation, and which would allow me to, like in a payment channel, to do intermediate state updates of the coin. And at some point, the next plasma block or whatever, the operator submits the transaction which has the latest state.
Yep,
but
that's right. The one other thing you want to have in that transaction that you don't normally have is a signature from the operator.
Right, exactly, yes. So so this kind of transaction would also, this kind of message rather, it would require to have, it would require to be signed by both parties. Because, so the final transaction does not have to be signed by the operator, the one that gets submitted to the plasma block. But all the, or maybe it needs, but all the intermediary ones need to be signed in order to do, in order to introduce a new type of challenge, in order to prevent the case where the operator includes a transaction from a prior state.
Yep.
Okay. I also want to argue that a user cannot submit, cannot like in any way include a transaction from a prior, perhaps invalid state, because they have to submit it to the operator. The operator will notice that it is from a prior invalid state, and they will simply censor it. Is that also correct?
If they're trying to submit a transaction, yeah, I mean, it would be invalid, so they wouldn't include it.
They can try, yes, exactly. The operator can include it, but no rational operator would include a transaction that gives them, that is from the state that gives them. Okay, cool. So we add an additional nonce field in the transaction, and the challenge that I have constructed for this is the following, and please let's try confirming it. So one moment, let me find it. So all right, so in the dishonest case, let's say that we are at some state where a user has a balance of 2 out of 5, and while the latest state has 3 out of 5, and the operator tries to exit at the state where the user has 2 out of 5 instead of the 3 out of 5, effectively like getting 1 ether more, as an example. So the user at this point has to challenge with the exact next state, or rather with the latest state, or to be more general, the user has to reveal a transaction for the same coin at the same block. And so, firstly, that the transaction, of course, was included. Secondly, that the transaction has been signed both by the operator and by the user. And finally, that it has a bigger nonce than the one that the operator...
So it doesn't actually have to be included then. It just has to have the signatures, because it could be an off-chain transaction, right? It could be one of the state channel-like transactions. So it needs either the signature of the operator or that it is included in the actual chain.
Let me note that down. I need to verify. I believe you, but just for my peace of mind, let's say. So either if the TX was included, you say, or it has both signature, or both. Okay, and the response in this case, the user challenges with the transaction. Sorry. Like to make it more explicit, to make it more concrete, actually. So because the operator, when they submit a block root, so there is no way for us to know what nonce the transaction that the operator included had. the user challenges with a transaction and they reveal some nonce.
Yeah.
And the operator then has to reveal a bigger nonce. So it's kind of in a reverse way, because the operator initially commits just a hash, and then they commit a Merkle root.
Yeah, if you're doing optimistic exits, yes.
Sorry, if we're
the operator tries to exit something, the user challenges, and the operator can respond with a higher nonce. That is what they were actually trying to do. So yes.
Exactly. And in the case where the operator is malicious, this transaction with the biggest nonce obviously does not exist. And since of course it is an interactive challenge, we require some bond by the initial challenge of the user. But so let me give an example of data availability, which I think does not work in this case. So the operator submits a root, it's honest, so they have submitted a valid state, and they withhold. So it is a griefing attack, essentially, in the usual sense of where the operator publishes the honest state, but they withhold the data. The user is inclined to challenge, because if they don't challenge, perhaps they lose money.
Yeah.
But then the operator reveals the transaction with a bigger nonce, reveals that the transaction they included was actually the valid transaction.
Yeah.
And then so they give the information to the user that, I included.
You wouldn't challenge if you've signed something with a higher nonce. So you know the highest nonce thing you've signed. So there's no reason for you to challenge if you know that you've signed something with that higher nonce.
Yes, but you if the operator withholds, you cannot know if they included.
At least with this type, you don't have to include it. If it's just, as long as it's signed by both parties, if it's signed by the operator and the user, then you don't have to include the. It doesn't have to be included in the block to have a.
Okay, so maybe that is the part that I am missing.
We can definitely talk about this, and I'd be happy to schedule something to talk about it. I don't want to. I think we're about at the end of the call, but I think this. Definitely.
Right,
I haven't thought through every single detail of it, definitely. So I appreciate that.
I think the attack is not upon exit. It's if you try to like finalize the coin on Plasma.
If you say finalize it,
that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking that the user is intending to exit the coin right after, but when they notice, we need to make it. I believe that this thing, it requires that it is a challenge of a coin that is not under an exit, essentially. It is a challenge for the operator trying to submit an invalid state for a coin, which will not get noticed at a later point.
I don't think there's an attack here, but happy to discuss it.
Okay, perfect. That's what I had in mind. I'm not sure how this would go on. But
No, interesting.
All right, but everyone read up on Plasma Debit, because I'm honestly, despite the shirt, starting to think.
I think it is. I believe that Plasma Debit is very easy to implement, but the hard part is like getting these small protocol details.
Yeah. It's very
because the implementation. I do believe that it's it's much easier to implement than checkpoints, for example.
Yeah. And if we find the protocol right, then the code gets dramatically smaller.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I want to discuss is how we would do atomic transactions between more than one coins. I say more than one. Ideally, the base case is 2. But for example, if a user has 2 coins for which are both 0 out of 3 and the other is 0 out of 2, it should be the case that they have receiving power 5 of 5 rather than.
I think
3
that probably should work, but definitely. Yeah, and at the worst, you can do it atomically, but yes. But I think you definitely do more than 2 coins even in a transaction. That should work.
Yeah,
I've got some posts, drafts, stuff like this.
Yeah. So perhaps we have taken our time. So maybe homework for next week for everyone, so we can do some discussion on this.
Yeah, that was really
sounds good.
Yeah, very fun.
Yeah. On atomic transactions.
Yeah.
I can mention that I've been thinking about atomic transaction Plasma Cash, and I think I came to a conclusion that you need the two-state gaming that have been described in MVP.
You need the what? Sorry, you disconnected.
Okay.
To what?
So there's a post called More Viable Plasma, and like one of them contains a two-stage exit game.
Oh, two-stage exit game. Yeah.
So I think that is necessary as well in all Plasma Cash designs. And the basic problem is that no matter how you design Plasma Cash, you're going to have a situation where sometimes you have a transaction with two inputs, and the two inputs don't trust each other.
So you say that in order to do transactions with more than one input, so essentially n inputs, n outputs, you say that you require a two-step exit game rather than one.
One output, it's two inputs.
Yeah, okay. Two inputs, one output, okay. Isn't two inputs, one output merging also?
Yeah, so exactly. So like the problem would be there.
So you say that if we alter the exit game to be more VP aligned, perhaps it would allow this kind of UTXO to exist, which would allow us to do merging.
Okay, so the main problem is like the current designs, like at least the way I've been designing it, I've been thinking of like there's no bond for anything. So like you can free people for free. And if you want to add a bond, you need how do you put it? You need to punish some people, but you also need to prevent people from. So like in the weirdest cases where you have one transaction you're trying to exit with two inputs, and one of the guys is bad and the other is good, for example, speaking very generally, and you want to let the good guy get out. So, but only the good guy is willing to provide the bond.
Okay. Do you think that doing some further reading on more VP is valuable for this discussion?
I think so. I think that is, yeah.
Okay.
We could loop back next call.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We just can't stop plasmaing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, I'll definitely think about that more. Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I didn't consider that one. Yeah, when it comes to two inputs.
But then again, this maybe make the exit period bigger.
It does.
Yeah.
I'll think about that. Yeah.
And then we will use the fast withdrawals from David's.
Cool.
Well, Joseph.
All right. So we had a lot of stuff to talk about. Yeah, that was fun. But yeah, let's for the stuff we didn't get to, let's definitely talk about it next call. Yeah, this is really fun. See you again, guys, in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
And see you,
All right.
everyone.
See you, everyone.
See you.